1 Timothy chapter 5. When you're a young preacher and you're communicating with your mentor, as Timothy and Paul were doing, one of the things that you need to know is, how do I treat the various members of the church? Just interpersonal relationships. And for some preachers, that's the end of it. They know Scripture, might be good communicators, but they're just not good people. They don't know how to just get along and work with different ages and different genders. So Paul writes Timothy what we would call a chapter about different kinds of people in the church and how to deal with them, how to handle himself as the minister of the church. So we're going to go through, there's, I guess, 3 or 4 categories that we'll look at. Basically, older men, older women, younger women. And Paul gives a little bit of direction for 3 out of those 4. So chapter 5, verse 1, do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. All of that's pretty self-explanatory, and we'll talk a little bit more later about the younger women. But don't rebuke an older man. This is the same word as describes elders. So when you look at Paul's talking to Titus, I left you on Crete to appoint elders. Paul and Barnabas stopped in the cities they had evangelized, and they appointed elders. Right? The office of an elder. It's the same word. It's an older man. It has other words that describe it, and we've talked about those things in the past, but the presbyteros, in the general sense, is just a man who is older, who has some age on him. The whole thing is about purity and having pure motives, but he warns Timothy to begin with not to get in the habit of letting people use him to get at the other older man. Right here, one of the traps that young preachers fall into is you come in and you have someone say to you, so-and-so is not a good fellow and we need to do something about it. We need you to fix it. And so they'll sick the preacher on them. Well, the preacher is young and doesn't know any better. And sometimes you choose up on the wrong sides, and sometimes you choose on the right side, but you don't handle it very well. And it can be a real fiasco for a young man to try to deal with older men who are much wiser, at least hopefully, and further along in life. So Paul says, don't rebuke an older man harshly. Treat him like you would your daddy. Go to him quietly and softly. Now, in my life, I might have been Timothy's age before I would have ever disagreed with my daddy. We had some disagreements, but I always assumed that I was going to be in trouble when we did. But Timothy's in his late 20s probably, and he's responsible for evangelizing and teaching and organizing in a congregation where there are people much older than him. So how do you handle that? It's difficult, and Paul says, be careful. Don't rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Okay? Look down at verse 17. Okay? More about elders, but this time we're talking about older men who are in leadership in the congregation. So the first one is just men who are older. Verse 17, he starts talking about men who are older and have leadership responsibilities. So the elders, same word, presbyteros, who direct the affairs of the church well, are worthy of double honor, especially those who work in preaching and teaching. Scripture says, do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain, and the worker deserves his wages. Do not entertain an accusation against an elder unless it's brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. But those elders who are sinning, you are to reprove before everyone, so that the others may take warning. I charge you in the sight of God and Christ and the elect angels, keep these instructions without partiality, and do nothing out of favoritism. Do not be hasty in laying on of hands, and do not share in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. The second time we've seen the word pure show up. we noticed that there were some men in Ephesus who were older men, and they were serving in preaching and teaching. Paul says if they're willing to serve in preaching and teaching, and they're doing well, then give them double honor. And the word honor there means pay them. Take good care of them physically. So pay them well, honor them. Secondly, he says protect them. Honor their reputations. If somebody comes to you and makes an accusation against one of the leaders of the congregation, realize that there may be ulterior motives there. They may be trying to find a way to undermine them. I fell into this trap personally several years ago. Was in a congregation where one elder was coming to me and complaining about the minister, the pulpit minister of the congregation, and he would come into my office regularly. I thought that all the elders were on the same page until I went to an elders meeting and made a statement about it, and the other elder said, "What are you talking about?" So I was listening to accusations against one of the ministers of the congregation without substantiating it. Paul says now, if it's real and there's more witnesses that come forward and you establish that this really is a problem, then you're going to have to step up and do something about it. You are responsible for leadership, even in the case of elders who are sinning. In our situation, 21st century, that's difficult. Right? The idea that a young preacher would step up and say, well, here's what's been said about brother so-and-so, one of the elders, and we need to do something disciplinary about that, would be a tremendously difficult place for a young preacher to be. But anyway, protect them. I was in one congregation and there was something said, I don't even remember what it was, but one of the elders came to me and he said, I want you to know that so-and-so said this. This was a comment that was made. And he said, I also want you to know that the elders of this congregation are going to form a ring of fire around you and protect you until this person is taken care of. And they did. It wasn't anything I could have handled or done anything about personally. I just had to trust the elders. The elders took care of it. So he tells Timothy that he needs to protect the elders as well as the not allowing people to speak against them. There we go, turn that off. So there's a need for Timothy to make sure that the leadership is okay. Now you couple that with what was said in the very beginning, right? Don't reproach an older man, but treat him like you would your father. And then you get down here and he says, don't accept accusations against an elder, except, you make sure that it's real. You get other testimony about it. So Paul was concerned about Timothy's relationship with the older men and with the leadership of the congregation. But then he says you also have to hold them accountable. That's going to be your responsibility as well. And then the last little snippet there I've always found interesting. Don't be hasty in the laying on of hands. Do not share in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. Don't throw them off the deep end by laying hands on too soon. By laying hands on, he means to appoint them to the office of an elder, to put them into office. They would lay hands on them. Paul talks to Timothy about that time when the elders laid hands on him and sanctioned him as a minister. Now it was Timothy's responsibility to lay hands on some folks and put them into office as elders. He says, don't do that too quickly. Don't be, too snap in your judgments on who's the right people to put into office. And surely we've seen through our lives that people became elders that probably should not have been elders. Some people can grow into the work, but it's better if they're already good shepherds when they become elders rather than having to grow into it gradually. Lots of mistakes are made, but we're all human. But Paul says, don't throw them off the deep end. Don't lay hands on them too quickly. And don't let people use you for their agenda to push either A, for an elder to become an elder because you like him and he likes you, or to not allow someone to be an elder who might be a good elder because someone else says, oh no, we don't want him. They block that. Either way is not the leadership of the Holy Spirit, but the leadership of petty human beings. And that's never going to work out well in the work of the Lord. So that's the older men who are serving as elders, older men who are not serving as elders, but who deserve respect just by virtue of their age. Okay. Drop back to chapter 5, verse 3. We'll take a look at older women. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, these should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I think the King James says infidel, doesn't it? I like that word. Worse than an infidel. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she's over 60, has been faithful to her husband, is well known for her good deeds, such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of good deeds. So there were older women who were being taken care of by the church. The idea of putting them on the roll was somewhat similar to the idea of paying the elders who were serving. So you have older men who are serving in leadership. You have some older women who are in service to the congregation. This is the kind of thing out of which grew the cloisters, right? When you look into the early centuries of the Catholic Church, you have women who give up living at home and who live in a cloistered situation, and they give their whole life to serving the church. Originally, it was older women who had already finished with their married life. Their husbands were dead, and so they took on serving in the church. Later on, the church began to take on younger women and allow them to serve as well, and that kind of rolled to the point where all women had to be virgins, and so younger and younger women were coming in to the service. If a woman is willing to do that, and if she gives herself in a life of service, who could argue against it? I mean, Paul himself over in 1 Corinthians says, it's better to be single. You know, if you're single, all you have to think about is you and the Lord. If you're married, you have to think about your spouse. You have to take care of your family. So there's other things besides just you and your work for the Lord. These older women had finished with their married lives. Their husbands are gone. Their children are grown. And they're in need. So there's kind of an equal, parlance here. I'll do work for the church. I'll take care of things that need to be done. And I'll pray for the membership. I'll stay in a spiritual state. And you guys take care of my physical needs. And so there were some women in that category. It's somewhat similar to the widows in Jerusalem early on, those Grecian widows. The difference is here, Paul gives some qualifications. The widows need to be these things in order for them to be cared for. In Acts, there's not a discussion of who's qualified to be on the roll. Just they're Grecian widows and they need help. And so you choose 7 guys to take care of them, and they choose, appoint those guys like Timothy who were some of them? Philip, and who's the first Christian martyr? Stephen, thank you. I had Timothy on my brain. Stephen and Philip were both these evangelistic servants, but their main job to begin with, the reason they were appointed, was to take care of these widows in the Jerusalem church. So Jerusalem, Ephesus have a lot of things in common, but here Paul says, don't be putting these women on automatically. Make sure that they're worthy of the honor that you're giving to them. So on the men, he says, if they preach and teach, they're worthy of honor, take care of them. If these women are known for their hospitality and for their godliness, that they've raised good children, that they're prayerful women, take care of them. However, don't take care of them if they're not. One of the first qualifications is that if they have children or grandchildren, that the children and grandchildren should take care of them before the church. I'm sure that there were situations where the children and grandchildren could not, but if they could, then the church should not. And I wonder how difficult that might have been for Timothy from time to time to look at a situation where there's a family that should be caring for the widow, but refuse to do so, but they don't qualify to be taken care of by the church. So that would have been again, Timothy was a young man in a difficult situation and was having to make a lot of decisions. He says, don't put a woman on the roll unless she's at least 60 years old. 60 years old was pretty good age in those days, right? David said 70, maybe by benefit of good health, 80. So that's 70 as a top age, maybe 80 if you're really healthy. We're having lots and lots of folks in their mid-80s, mid-90s these days. So I don't know if our lifespan has actually increased that much. I'd have to take a look and see where we are worldwide. But as far as a 60-year-old woman was concerned in those days, that was pretty old. She was on up there in years. The arbitrary point here, though, is interesting to me. Why 60? You got to pick a number, I guess. But what about a woman that's 59 that's really in need? I want to think Timothy had some leeway, that 59 and she needs help was better than 61 and doesn't really. But anyway, he had a lot of difficult decisions to make in getting those women taken care of. The list of personal attributes is more important than the age. She's known for good deeds. She's known for raising children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the saints. Literal or figurative? What do you think? Was she actually washing people's feet, or was she just good to folks? We talk about people in our day and age with that euphemism. We don't say it as much as we used to, but we say, well, that fella's a real foot washer, or that woman's a real foot washer. She really takes care of people. So one way or the other, she might have been doing it literally in those days. Helping those in trouble, known for her good deeds. This is a woman that's worthy of being helped. So again, you have to get into their character. You're let's call him 28. You're a 28-year-old kid. You've got to gather together information on her background and who she is and how she treats people, and make a decision as to whether she is going to receive the funding from the church. So difficult for Timothy. And then, beginning in verse 11, we get the younger women. Now, younger women are more trouble for young preachers than anybody else. An older woman will make you a pie. A younger woman will make your life miserable. You could get in a lot of trouble with a younger woman. And younger widows who have been married before can be even more so. So as for younger widows, don't put them on such a list. Just period. Don't put them on such a list. When their sensual desires overcome their dedication to Christ, they want to marry. Thus they bring judgment on themselves because they have broken their first pledge. So we've got to ask the question, is it okay for a younger woman to remarry?
Next page here.
Yeah.
Just a little farther down.
Yeah. It's a good idea, right? It's a great idea. But she's made a pledge. When they put her on the roll, when they put her on the list, her responsibilities were to be in prayer, to take care of the needs of the church, to do those kinds of things. and then she's breaking that pledge that she made. So again, in the Catholic Church, one of the problems that they had, or still have, I assume, is that young women would take a vow, come in and become either pledges or make their way all the way into serving as nuns, and then realize that they were missing something in their lives, and that they would seek out male companionship, and then they give up on their original pledge. I don't know what the policies are. I just know that's a problem. It was a problem then. It's a problem in the modern world. But they bring judgment on themselves because they've broken their first pledge. I think I have down here, look back at verse 11 and 12. 11 and 12, and then 14 and 15. I counsel younger women, younger widows, to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, and give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some have, in fact, already turned away to follow Satan. So, like David said, sheep is down there. The idea that if they make a pledge, they need not marry, but if they don't make the pledge, the best thing for them to do is to get married. So, there's an either or for those. Verse 13, besides, they get into the habit of being idle and going about from house to house. Not only do they become idlers, but also busybodies who talk nonsense, saying things they ought not to. So I counsel younger women to marry, to have children, to manage their homes, to give the enemy no opportunity for slander. Some have in fact already turned away to follow Satan. If any woman who is a believer has widows in her care, she should continue to help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those widows who are really in need. So we have kind of a mixture of the younger women and the older women. It could be a younger woman who has her mother or her mother-in-law still living at the house. So they shouldn't seek to get the church to take care of her. She's already there. She's already in your home. You could take care of her. Or it may be extended family, that someone within the church, one of the younger women, had a relationship with the older woman and is taking care of her because of the relationship spiritually, not necessarily the relationship familially. They're not really family, but they've adopted each other. And so if you're willing to do that, then do that, so that the church is not responsible for that. Roll forward to 21st century. Who takes care of our widows? Retirement, Social Security, hopefully family members. Is it still appropriate for us to keep an eye out for older women in our congregation who are in need and make sure those needs are met?
Yes.
Of course it is. I'm not sure that we should imitate what Paul is giving Timothy here, this idea of forming a roll where we look for widows to put on and to supply. But if there's a need and we see the need, obviously, we should take care of it. Now, I know that this doesn't apply necessarily to this table, but a statement that I need to make, because I have young preachers that look at these things from time to time. Best advice, older woman, younger woman, if you need to counsel with them, if they want to come to your office or come to your home and visit with you, have your wife either in the room or in the next room so that you can get hold of them immediately. Becky and I have had a relationship for 38 years in which she's close by and will call me in the early portions of the discussion with this other woman and ask me the question, how are things going? If I say everything's peachy, that means don't worry about it. If I say everything is peachy, everything is peaches and cream, that means get here as quick as you can. So don't leave yourself in a difficult situation. Don't get into a place where anybody could ever make an accusation against you. Love your wife, honor your wife, keep everything above the table. Any questions about any of this? Yes, sir.
There was a preacher over here that y'all probably do, he's passed away now, Bill. He told me one time, he said, if you ever go and counsel anybody that takes somebody with you. Said, never go by yourself. He said, I learned that the hard way. I don't know what he meant or anything, but I took him in the word.
Yeah. In all this time, we've only had one peaches and cream. Usually it's just fine, but there's no reason to lose all of the good that you've done and all of the good that you can do for the sake of being so full of yourself that you think you can handle the situation and it's going to be fine. If you feel uncomfortable, get out of the situation.
Well, I guess I got lucky on that because when I was counseled, that was my wife's uncle, Cecil Lanning, where was it? That was back in the 60s.
So I guess the main thing to remember out of chapter 5 is that Timothy is a young guy. I mean, he's probably not 30 yet. He may be right around 30. And he had so much weight on his shoulders, but he had an older minister, and not just any minister. I mean, he had an apostle that he could talk to, that he could send letters back and forth and get good advice on how to handle those situations. So whether in preaching or just as Christians, all of us should seek out older folks, wiser folks, experienced Christians, and, kind of set the pride aside sometimes and tell them things we need to tell them so that they can help to counsel us and move us in right directions as we do our work. Anything else? All right, tell you guys bye.